Welcome to Soul Food, a ministry of Calvary Chapel, Princeton, West Virginia.
This morning, if I were to ask you to write down on a 3x5 card all you knew about the Korah rebellion, I wonder how you would do. We find it in the book of Numbers 16 and 17. Those might be the pages that are still stuck together. Look at verse 1 with me. Now Korah, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and on the sons of Peleth, the sons of Reuben, took men. And they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" Have you ever heard this question? How can you Christians claim that Jesus is the only way to God? Isn't that just terribly narrow-minded of you to make such an assertion? Where people go wrong is they think you can approach God in the same way that you approach buying toothpaste. Like it's just a matter of personal preference. For some odd reason, humanity has the crazy idea that we know more than God. I love J. Vernon McGee, who once said, "This is God's universe, and God does things His way. You may think you have a better way, but you don't have a universe." That's my J. Vernon McGee voice. Although upon hearing it, it sounds more like Jimmy Stewart. But I'm working on it. Now in this story, we have the Old Testament counterpart of John 14:6, where Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes through the Father except through me." And what I want us to see is the idea of the uniqueness of God's approach through the one that He ordains is not just a New Testament concept, but it goes all the way back to the Pentateuch. The background of Numbers chapter 16 is they have been given the law, and now they are making their way through the wilderness towards the land of promise. But we now run into a problem. Some of them decide it's a good time to start complaining. Here's their beef with Moses and Aaron. Specifically, they don't like the rules, and they don't like the fact that God has placed a mediator between Himself and the people. For God required the high priest to sacrifice an animal for the sins of the people, and they were then saved by faith in that sacrifice. Sound familiar? You can almost imagine their conversation with Moses and Aaron. You've probably heard it before. It goes like this. "You're telling me that I can't come to God on my own terms. Of all the narrow-minded, bigoted things I've ever heard, you have the audacity to tell us that God has prescribed one and only one way to approach Him." "Well, Moses, I watched Oprah this morning, and both she and I strongly disagree with you." Look at verse 4. "So then Moses heard it. When he heard it, he fell on his face. And he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, 'Tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is His and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to Him. That one whom He chooses, He will cause to come near to Him. Do this. Take censers, Korah and all your company, put fire in them and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord chooses is the Holy One. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi.'" Sometimes people wonder if we will be able to recognize people in heaven. I think Moses will be easy to spot. He'll be the guy with the flat nose. It seems he's always falling on his face, during this wandering time. So Moses will probably have a flat nose and Peter will have a foot protruding from his mouth. But seriously, Moses gives us a great example. Whenever a problem arises, he humbles himself by falling on his face before the Lord. And I have to believe that maybe if we would fall on our face before we face a problem, we wouldn't fall on our face in the failing sense after we've tried in our own strength to resolve that issue. So anyway, Moses says, hey, let's not just stand here arguing theology. Let's have a test. You take some censers and offer them before God, and we'll see if God will accept your worship on your own terms without the mediation of the priest. What can go wrong? Verse 8. Then Moses said to Korah, hear now, you sons of Levi, is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to serve them, and that he has brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi with you? Are you also seeking the priesthood? Therefore you and all your company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that you complain against him? Moses now tells them in verse 9 where their problem lies. He says, your problem is not with us. Your problem is with you. And the problem is the problem of pride. Moses tells them that God has separated and blessed you above the other tribes to serve him in a special capacity, but you've allowed this to go to your head. And you don't like the idea now that there's just one way to approach God. What I want us to see this morning is man has an innate problem with that. Of course, if you just talk about religion and a generic God, man has no problem with that. But when you mention a blood-stained cross, honey, now you have issues. You see, the cross to an intelligent man is foolishness, and the cross to a self-righteous man is insulting. So they're like, if you're telling me that I'm no better than the worst of men, and I have to come to God the same way that they do, well, now I'm offended. What astounds me is nothing has changed. Even to this day, mankind is so hard that we cannot stomach the idea of coming to God on his own terms. They didn't like it then, and we don't like it now. Think of it this way. The first time somebody told you that your best deeds of righteousness was no better than filthy rags, did that not offend you? Or did you smite your breast and say, oh, tell us me more of my vile state, thou holy man of God? Why? Because to the Jews, Jesus is a stumbling block, and to the Gentiles, he is stupidity. Please listen to me. The false idea that I can approach God by myself without Jesus as my representative is the crux of all Christianity. There are many theological errors you can make and still not cost you your soul. But this is not one of them. To reject Christ as the only way is to reject the very nature of God and his reality. Let's go down to verse 31. Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, with their households and all the men with Korah with all their goods. So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. Then all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up also. And a fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive to Sheol, which is the Hebrew word for grave or pit. And the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. By the way, that is always the ending of the rebellious. Their end will always be the pits. Eventually, they will go down to the pit of despondency. and then the pit of despair, until finally they go to the pit of destruction. Think of all the movie and rock stars who have died by accident or suicide, and you will see that their memory fades more and more with every passing year. This whole event is just a tad bit sobering, isn't it? God says to them, "You are so contemptible to me that I want you and everything you own to completely disappear from my sight." I have no doubt that God has completely convinced that generation that you don't come to God on your own terms. But now we're going to need a sign as a sort of Sunday school lesson to those who will come later. Verse 36. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest to pick up the censers out of the blaze, for they are holy, and scatter the fire some distance away. The censers of these men who sinned against their own souls, let them be made into hammer plates as a covering for the altar. Because they presented them before the Lord, therefore they are holy, and they shall be assigned the children of Israel." So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers, which those who were burned up had presented, and they were hammered out as a covering on the altar, to be a memorial to the children of Israel, that no outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron should come near to offer incense before the Lord. That he might not become like Korah and his companions, just as the Lord had said to him through Moses. Now, Exodus teaches us that the censers for burning incense were to be made out of pure gold, and yet those in the rebellion here used brass instead of gold. Any ideas why they would do that? Some scholars believe that this is the same group that pressured Aaron into making the golden calf in Exodus 32. In that case, they would have had to use brass since they used up all their gold making the grand poobah cow. So this incense that was to be offered as a sacrifice rising to God was to come from gold that was beaten and not brass that was molded. You can beat gold, but you mold brass, and that's the difference. You see, it's not up to us to mold ourselves into some position of authority. But the way of the Lord, which is real, has to be beaten, broken, and hammered. Then and only then can we serve God to our full capacity. Hebrews 5:8, speaking of Jesus himself, says, although he was a son, Jesus learned obedience through the things that he suffered. That's true in our lives also. The things which we really have to offer and share with other people only comes from the crucible of suffering. Moses says this is a reminder and a sign of the generations that follow, so this sort of thing never has to happen again. Let me tell you what the lesson is. When you approached God through the tabernacle, it had like a 30-foot opening for the door. It was like the arms of God bidding everyone to come in. But when you came by a very narrow portal, which was the altar of sacrifice. And unless you came by that shed blood of that sacrifice, you were prohibited to come into his presence. So please understand that anyone can come to God, but you must come God's way. And let me make clear this morning, there is no plan B to that. I don't care if you are a king or a slave. No one approaches God except through the shedding of blood. So God says, I want you to take those censers of those false men and beat them into a plating that I then want you to put on top of the altar. And for the rest of the generations of Israel, that altar is going to burn red hot, and that plating is going to glow red hot. And so in the future, when you would take your child up to that opening, you can tell them that although the arms of God are wide open to invitation, we have to come a certain way. And that way that we come is a perfect animal given in our place. You would then say to your child, now I want you to notice that plating. That wasn't originally there. Do you know why that's there now? that plating grows red hot. And it reminds us that if we don't come to God in God's way, one day we too will burn. So it's a sign and a reminder to us. Now let me tell you the story behind this. You would tell your kid. And then you would tell them the story of a people who in pride and arrogance decided that they knew better than God. And they tried to come their own way. When I typed that, it reminded me of Hebrews 10:29, which reads, "How much severer punishment do you think he will deserve who has trampled underfoot the Son of God," get this, "and is regarded as unclean the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified, and has insulted the Spirit of grace." You would then tell your child, so always make sure you come the right way. I would think that would have a lasting impact, right? How do you think these people receive the news? Amazingly. Despite everything they have witnessed, they still don't get it. Verse 41, "But on the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, 'You are the ones who have caused the death of the Lord's people.' It came about, however, when the congregation assembled against Moses and Aaron, that they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Get away from this congregation, that I may consume them instantly.' Then they fell on their faces." Can you even believe these people? God had just opened up the earth and swallowed people alive. And these guys, I don't know if you saw that, the very next day are blaming Moses and Aaron. Look, this church may drive me crazy, but you ain't nothing like these cats. If you're new here and you don't know what that story means, just ask someone at the picnic, and they will take just great delight in telling you the church is driving me crazy story. But please take note that Moses don't have to say anything. God just interrupts and says, in effect, forget just killing the 250. I'm going to wipe out the entire lot of them. Sadly, once again, this is nothing new. If you recall, while God was giving Moses the 10 Commandments, the people were down there dancing around the golden calf like a bunch of savages hopped up on moonshine. Listen to what God said. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down at once, for your people, whom you brought up from the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, and said, 'This is your God, O Israel, who's brought you up from the land of Egypt.' The Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen these people, and behold, they are an obstinate people. Now then let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation.'" Basically, God is telling Moses the same thing that Bill Cosby once told one of his kids. And that was, "Boy, I'll kill you and make another one who looks just like you." Verse 46. Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put it in the fire from the altar and lay incense on it. Then bring it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone forth from the Lord, the plague has begun." Then Aaron took it as Moses had spoken and ran into the midst of the assembly, for behold, the plague had begun among the people. So he put on the incense and made atonement for the people. He took his stand between the dead and the living, so that the plague was checked. It says, Aaron took his stand between the dead and the living. I love that. Is that not a beautiful picture of what Jesus did for us on the cross? It was there he lifted up, and the fragrance of his sacrifice had placated the wrath of a holy God. So Aaron's fragrance also arises. And we can see that that plague was checked because of the sufficiency of the sacrifice. Just as Jesus came into this world, died upon the cross, and because of that, death has now been defeated. This is one of the great pictures in the Old Testament of the atonement. This is a beautiful portrait of Jesus Christ who stands between the dead and the living. It says, always making intercession for us. He is the one who has stopped the plague of sin. But you see, if we're honest, we were the jealous. We were the grumblers. We were the rebellious. Well, we have a sign of death, but now God says, I need to give them a sign of life, just as affirming to the sufficiency of Aaron as the high priest, as I do the sign of death to the deficiency of men. And so in Numbers chapter 17, the Lord does this. This is verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and get from them a rod for every father's household, 12 rods from all their leaders according to their fathers' households. You shall write each name on his rod, and write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi. For there is one rod for the head of each of the fathers' households. You shall then deposit them in the tent of meeting in front of the testimony where I meet with you. Now we need to know that these rods are much more than just old sticks. They were equivalent to the Jewish coat of arms. They had the lineage of your tribe written upon it. And so when those 12 rods were laid down, that was representative of the 12 tribes that made up the entire nation. So God is saying, what we're going to do, we're going to lay these 12 dead sticks down, and the man that I choose, that stick is going to sprout. In other words, we're going to have a resurrection. We're going to have life from the dead. You lay them there that evening, you go to bed, and on the next morning, there'll be new life. As the kids say, it's about to get very interesting. I guess they still say that, I don't know. Verse 5, it will come about that the rod of the man whom I choose will sprout. Thus I will lessen from upon myself the grumblings of the sons of Israel who are grumbling against you. Moses therefore spoke to the sons of Israel, and all their leaders gave him a rod apiece, for each leader according to their fathers' households, 12 rods, with the rod of Aaron among their rods. So Moses deposited the rods before the Lord in the tent of the testimony. Do you get what God is saying there in verse 5? He is saying, by doing this, I will finally get some relief from the grumblings among you about who is the greatest. I imagine that next morning, the air was charged with electricity as they all went in to see whom the Lord had chosen. Guess which rod blossomed? It was the one that the Lord chose. And you know what? Over the centuries, there have been a lot of great men and women who have died and been laid down before God, but there has only been one person who has been raised on his own. 1 Corinthians 15:20 says, but now Christ has been risen from the dead, the first fruits of those who fall asleep. Look at verse 8. Now on the next day, Moses went into the tent of the testimony, and behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. Moses then brought out all the rods from the presence of the Lord to all the sons of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his rod. But the Lord said to Moses, put back the rod of Aaron before the testimony to be kept as a sign against the rebels, that you may put an end to their grumblings against me, so they will not die. Thus Moses did, just as the Lord commanded him, so he did. We see in verse 8 there, that Aaron's rod produced blossoms and even bore ripe almonds. This made Aaron very happy. And that's where you get the term almond joy. Hey, I could have said, Aaron said, this bud's for you, but I held back. This is a miraculous event. Even on the best of days, something like this doesn't occur where there is a resurrection from the dead. Imagine if you had an apple tree in your backyard, and one day in September, a windstorm breaks off one of the branches. You don't think much about it, and because you're so busy, you never get the chance to throw it away. Well, one day in May, you happen to be walking in your backyard, and you decide to go get that branch and throw it away. How shocked would you be if upon picking up that branch, you saw several luscious and ripe apples dangling from it? That would pretty much constitute a miracle, I would say. So what did all those 12 staffs have in common before they were brought before the testimony? They were all dead pieces of wood that had been broken off from their life source. In this story, we see it's only the staff of Aaron who blooms. So if a normal staff cannot bloom because it has been severed from its life force or source, then the staff of Aaron blooms because it was attached to a life source, which was God himself. I love verse 9 where it says, they looked and each man took his rod. And that is what is required of all human beings. To look and see that me and my best works and my glory have no hope whatsoever. And so they took their dead, cold, and inert rods. The purpose is verse 10. It was a sign to the rebels. The Lord would say, any person who thinks they can reject my method and mediation and come to me on his own terms, here's a sign. And it is this. There is a person who has my approval and my righteousness and my life. And through him, I will give life to anyone who comes to me so they will not die. All you have to do is come through the mediator I have provided. The Apostle Peter would write this, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his great mercy has caused us to be born again, to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, which is imperishable and undefiled and will not fade away, reserved in heaven for you. If you're a Christian, have you ever wondered if you're really going to go to heaven one day? Is he at the right hand of God, ascended and seated? Yes. And if he's there, then we who are his body are there also. Hebrews 6:19 says, we have an anchor for the soul, steadfast and sure, that enters within the veil, a high priest forever and ever. So back to my original question from the beginning. How can Christians say that Jesus is the only way? We proclaim that because it is the very thing that God has revealed to us. He will not accept you, no matter how beautiful your rod may be, any more than he would accept Adam's covering of fig leaves. Instead, he rejected that, killed an innocent animal, and used that to cover Adam. My friends, we in time and space can't go any further than Numbers 16 and 17. It's a sign to us rebels that God only accepts the man of his choosing. That is why he is called Christ, the Anointed One. And I urge all of us to run to him today. Let us pray. Lord, it is amazing, not that there's just one way, but that there is a way at all. Reveal yourself to us, and let us run to you, for you and you alone can give eternal life. We thank you for who you are and what you've done. And we ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen.